This question from Chris on email. What's happening with Viktor Gyokeres and why hasn't he joined Arsenal yet? We've been waiting for this for some time, Andy.
It was supposed to be all straightforward, or it was supposed to be easy in the words of Mike Skinner, and it hasn't been really. So there's always been a great relationship between Gyökeres and Sporting. Even though he has a €100 million buyout clause, there was never any sense that they were going to enforce that when he agreed to stay last summer. Remember, he was one of those players who was convinced by Ruben Amorim, why don't we go for a second successive title? We'll all stay here and we'll do it together. And everyone goes, yeah, okay. And then in autumn, Ruben Amorim goes, actually, I'm off to Manchester United. And some of the players were a bit, okay. Gyökeres being one of those, but obviously he stayed, had a brilliant season, helped Sporting win the title, win the double. Since then, it's been a bit stickier. I guess for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it always looked as if he would end up going back a while at Manchester United because of the link with Amorim, because Amorim had gone into bat for him so hard to sign him in the first place and had such a role in his development. Even if United weren't the best team in England anymore, it felt like that would be the fit. There have been two things that have blown that off course. Obviously, firstly, the fact that there's not going to be any European football, and secondly, the fact that it's been clear that they are not exactly flush over the last little while. And then the fact that when Gyökeres has gone to open market, Federico Fernandes, the Sporting president, has gone back on what Gyökeres and his camp feel is his word of letting him go for a lower figure. And they've even threatened him recently because they're not happy with the offers that have come in. They've been threatening him and his agent with charging the full release clause. Now, look, I don't think that will happen. I think something will still come about. But the fact that Arsenal have been interested but not all in, and from what I gather have not actually made an official offer yet, that has been incredibly frustrating for Gyökeres. It's been incredibly frustrating for Sporting as well. And it's given a bit of encouragement to Juventus, who, if we're being honest, probably can't really afford this deal. I think that they're obviously looking to do some sort of part exchange business, as they always do, which Sporting have absolutely no interest in. To me, it seems from the outside that there's a bit of a debate about this at Arsenal. He is the striker that Arsenal need, in my opinion, as I've said before. But it's clear that Mikel Arteta's preference is for Benjamin Šeško. I think when you look at what Arsenal lack, Gyökeres ticks all of those boxes far better. And he's always going to be a better goal scorer than Šeško. If Šeško plays until he's 100, he won't score as many goals as Gyökeres, in my opinion. It doesn't appear that he's totally off the table, but it doesn't appear as if he's Arsenal's priority. And I think that's a bit of a shame for Arsenal, to be honest.
Yeah, I just think, look, it's a lot of money for either Gyökeres or Šeško. I think they want to be extremely sure they're getting the right player for now and the right player for the future. The reason I mention the future is I think a lot of clubs are very much looking at the here and now, but they're also looking at the future in terms of resale. In terms of money, what money they can get in the future. So they might look at Šeško and say he's younger, he's somebody who can develop. We want him to score the goals to win us the Premier League, get us far in the Champions League. But they're also wanting there, if it doesn't work out, then he's young enough to have that resale later on. They might feel it's a bit better than Gyökeres. But yeah, it's an interesting situation that Gyökeres has gone to Portugal. He's plundered goals, but the move hasn't come together, and I think it is largely because of teams with too many players on their books that they need to move on first. I think despite what Andy's pointed out about Man United, lack of European football, their finances not being particularly good, I think if they had shifted Sancho, Garnacho and Anthony by now, but they haven't because they're on such high wages. Clubs are very looking to take them. Then they might have gone for Gyökeres, and it's the same with the Juve situation as well. They got Vlahovic who's sitting there as well. So I think it's a cause and effect as to why Gyökeres hasn't got his move yet.
This question from Calvin on YouTube. Where does the Turkish Super Lig go from here now that we've seen alleged leaked WhatsApp messages about Jose Mourinho from the Turkish Football Federation's disciplinary committee? Andy, am I the only person who hasn't seen these leaked WhatsApp messages?
You clearly weren't included in that group, Dotun. I don't know if that was by error or by design, but
it's shocking.
It's bad. Maybe you just had it on mute. But the story basically is that there are these leaked WhatsApp messages from members of the disciplinary committee, as Calvin says, which seem to be saying we're going to make Mourinho pay for stuff that he's done. Now, look, I'm not sure there's anything massively revelatory in here. Obviously, Fenerbahce are incensed, and I can understand that. We've had resignations from the TFF disciplinary committee because Fenerbahce's argument is, it shows there's no impartiality. But the fact is, Mourinho went to town on the quality and made strong inferences about the integrity of Turkish match officials, and he was fined 35 grand, banned for 4 games, and then both punishments were halved. I feel it would have been worse in pretty much any other European league. So, look, I'm not saying this is a good thing or it's a correct thing at all, and certainly I think there has to be clarity of process. But having said that, despite this idle chatter, it appears as if it is just idle chatter. It doesn't feel as if Mourinho has really been made to carry the can for anything. I think it's one of those things that is loose-lipped, definitely. It's something that people and officials shouldn't be saying, and it definitely warrants further investigation. But I also think, because it's Jose Mourinho, it's a much bigger story outside Turkey than it is inside it. So, Turkish football is just talking about what it normally talks about, who's signing who. Funnily enough, it feels as if some of this chatter, at least, is trying to draw attention from the fact that a lot of people are talking about Mourinho's performance as a coach last season. So, former Fenerbahce players are lining up to give him a bit of a kick in the media at the moment. Remember, we talked about the last game of the season. There were banners in the very, very sparse crowd against Kayserispor that in favour of Ismail Kartal, his predecessor as well, got 99 points the previous season. So look, definitely does warrant further investigation, and greater transparency is definitely to be campaigned for. But I think the story's not maybe quite as bad as it seems on the surface.
David, what do you make of this question from Paul on Instagram? Now that Gianpiero Gasperini has officially left Atalanta, is Ademola Lookman still likely to leave the club? You might want to explain. You would have thought that the question would be, is Ademola Lookman now likely to stay at the club when his nemesis has gone?
Yeah, look, I think we've discussed this previously to a level, and I think we said, obviously there was a very high profile fallout between Gasperini and Lookman. Or should I say, there was some very high profile comments from Gasperini about Lookman that were a bit ill advised, to say the least. But I think regardless of Gasperini staying or going, Lookman needs to move in terms of, look, he's got his career back on track there. He's developed extremely well into one of the best wingers around. But the issue is, like with every transfer, is finding that ideal next place for him. A lot has been said about Napoli. But if you look at De Laurentiis and how he's worked things in terms of business at Napoli, they're not a team who are going to go in and pay 70, 80 million for somebody. They'd be looking to pay 20, 30 million, develop them, and then likely sell them further down the line. So it's going to be a case of Atalanta coming down from their value of 70, 80 million, wherever it is, and Napoli bringing. Using the Kvaratskhelia money probably to get him then, but yeah, it's a difficult one to see it happening, and I think he might be waiting a bit this summer, to be honest with you.
I think this is the issue, isn't it, really, David? You talked about how hard he's worked to get his career back on track. I think the age is a big thing here. You know, he's going to be 28 in October. He's clearly at the peak of his powers. African Footballer of the Year, of course. He's been brilliant over the last couple of years, and anyone who's watched Lookman even semi-regularly knows that. But he's also in quite a tricky situation. I mean, for what it's worth, I think the relationship with Gasperini is not unsalvageable. I think if he was 2 or 3 years younger and Roma had more money, they would go in for him now. I really do, because Gasperini loves him. Of course, that they had a dispute, but if we're writing a list of players that Gasperini's had a public fallout with, you know, we're going to need the sort of piece of paper that Jack Kerouac used for writing on the road, really, because it's everyone. And it's one of those things. He manages to get past it, or he gets rid of the player. Now, I think they could actually work together again, but I think I hate to say it, but I think the most logical move is probably the Saudi Pro League, because I think for him to be valued financially in the way that he justifiably feels that he should, I don't think anyone in Italy can go for that. Like David says, there's no resale really. If you sign him for like 4 years, you're never getting your money back, however well he plays. So is it really a justifiable signing? I feel that's a bit of an issue. I can understand why he feels that this should be a next step from Atalanta, and I can understand why a few of those players would feel that at the moment, because Gasperini is so closely embedded in the club. There must be a sense when he goes of like era over. I don't think you can feel any other way about it. But you know, the fact is, he is in this tricky in between place.
Yeah. David, that Jack Kerouac reference tickled you as well, didn't it?
That was brilliant. It's one of my favourite books, so I like that.
Well, it is mine as well, On the Road. It's spontaneous prose. It was a long sheet of paper, but they call it spontaneous prose, for those who don't know. However, there is this question we've got to deal with from Dango on email. Does Hugo Ekitike have what it takes to crack the Premier League with Manchester United or Liverpool?
Yes, he does. Look, he's got the lot, and I think you can get over one misstep early on in your footballing career, and his was joining PSG at a time when he was never going to crack that superstar front three. I think it held up his development because he didn't get enough minutes. He was a bit out of his depth, but I think we've been reminded in the last little while at Eintracht Frankfurt of why people were so interested in Ekitike in the first place. Because he's strong, because he's powerful, because he can score goals and bring others into play, because he turns up in the big games, all of those things. He's shown a bigger level at Eintracht Frankfurt. Now, of course, the difficulty is when you're dealing with Eintracht Frankfurt, they're like the modern Porto or Benfica, really, or Borussia Dortmund, if you like. They're very good at developing young players, redeveloping players who fell off a little bit elsewhere, and basically getting players into a position where they're at a far greater value than when they pick them up. And, you know, we could do the list all over again if you like, whether it be Colomwani, Pacho, Jovic, Aller. We're going to be here all day going through them. And he will probably be next. But what you also know, if you look back at some of those players and the fees they've gone for, Ekitike is not going to be going for cheap. You know, when there was that chance for Newcastle to buy him and he chose PSG instead, that was the one chance he had of going to the Premier League for 25 mil. That has been and gone now. Now, whether you think Ekitike is worth 100 million, and I don't think anyone sane out there really does, the reality is that Eintracht Frankfurt don't desperately need to sell, and they're going to drive a really, really hard bargain. That's what they're going to do. They've sold Omar Mamouche for a lot of money relatively recently, so they're in decent financial shape. So I don't think it's out of the question that they hold him for another year, because I just wonder, when you look at the possible candidates, David, who's breaking the bank for him at the moment, even if he's like very Premier League ready?
We keep going back to this, but it's about teams who can free up the money for him. I think there's probably Liverpool and Liverpool. I think it might be on Liverpool who are in a position to go for him. We've seen Chelsea bring in Delap. We've seen Man United struggling to find the cash for Gyökeres. We're not getting any. He's not getting. They're not getting a cheaper player here. So yeah, it's hard to say. Again, his market is really narrow too. I think he'd appeal to a lot of clubs, but it's the case of who can come up with the money for him. And I think a lot of clubs are looking at him and looking at what Alexander Isak has done in the Premier League. I think there's a lot of similarities in their games, and they're probably thinking they can get Isak 2.0. And even though he's expensive, he will be cheaper than the Isak 1.0. So yeah, we'll see what happens here. But it's going to be, again, a very difficult deal. But this is going to be a common theme throughout the summer.
Yeah. So in conclusion, Dango, it's Liverpool. Yeah, the strike the Manchester United one, according to David. Anyway, this from Matt on email, with the frankly baffling rumour that Barcelona want to fit Luis Diaz into a front three of Rafinha, Dani Olmo and Lamine Yamal. Wow. What is happening to the La Masia graduates that kept them afloat in recent times? Players like Marc Casado, Fermin Lopez and Gavi would improve most teams, but seem to be one further step away from the first team with every transfer window. Do you want to take that, David?
Yeah, sure. Look, La Masia products are complete 100% book value for Barcelona. They will always be the first out of the door in terms of they need to raise funds, and Barcelona will always need to raise funds. If you have a generational, incredible talent like Lamine Yamal, obviously you keep him, you tie him down. But then there's others who they say, look, you're a good player, we like you. You haven't put a foot wrong for us. So you're Casado, you're Fermin Lopez, you're Gavi. But if we get a ridiculous offer from a Premier League team, we might have to consider selling you, because there are other players that we might want to bring into the club that might be able to help us in the here and now, in instant impact. And it's a shame, because I think the players we've mentioned are all really good players, and I completely agree. They would improve most teams. And I think if Barca have the patience, then they can also help improve Barca as well. But ultimately, the balance in the books is top priority, and those guys are always going to be near the exit door.
I mean, the amazing thing to me is that they just haven't learned their lesson, have they? In terms of, you're in the financial position you're in because despite the fact you produce more than enough good players and more than enough top quality players to be in a position where you can build a great team and challenge and dominate, and you can just supplement those with a few sensible signings, they won't get out of their own way, will they? I mean, they don't need Luis Diaz. It'd be nice to have, like he's a great player, but they don't really need him. Like, to me, the far more logical play is Ivan Perisic, who, by the way, has made it quite clear that he would like to sign for Barcelona. We know Hansi Flick's interested in him. Someone who's experienced, can pass on his wisdom to the younger players, isn't going to kick up a fuss that he's not going to play every game, is free, is not going to cost a fortune in wages. That's the sensible move. But of course, just because they don't need a player doesn't mean they're not going to sign him. You know, this is Barcelona after all. So, I mean, I guess the question when we get onto Casado and Fermin and players like that. That's slightly different because we're talking about the front half of the team compared to midfield. So it's a slightly different question. But look, I think really they just need to take a breath here, realise they've got a fantastic team, work on keeping that together and the financial viability of keeping that together. Of course, they've had to spend a load to keep Lamine Yamal on board, and they had to do that. There was no doubt about that. But don't put yourself in a position where you're maybe going to have to entertain offers for him later down the line, as David was saying, because you've dug yourselves another massive financial hole.
This next one is a great question, I think. I'm going to have to ask you both to look in your crystal balls. But Barry in Instagram wants to know, in 20 years' time, how big of a deal do you think the younger generation will consider the Club World Cup? Isn't that a great question, Andy?
It is a good question. And I think there are a lot of factors that you have to take into consideration. Firstly, how does the rest of this one go? Secondly, does it remain every 4 years or do they bring it to every 2 years? Look, at some point, something is going to have to give somewhere in the calendar. And ultimately, I think this season has taught us something that football authorities, this European season has taught us something that football authorities should know. For all the money, the mad money, and we're talking about Barcelona, have spent trying to market themselves, make themselves globally sexy, two best teams to watch, hands down, in Europe this season, PSG and Barcelona. Why? Because of what they do on the pitch, because of the football they play, because of the young players who, in the case of Lamine Yamal, came through the academy. In the case of Vitinha, Messi complained when PSG signed him. Ousmane Dembele obviously cost a lot of money for Barcelona, but not so much for PSG. And I think if you ask football supporters in general, last season, I don't think many people would have said he's one of the best players on the planet. But look, the fact is, for everything that marketing people can come up with to say what is going to make the world love this football team, what is going to make the world love this tournament, it's the game. It is the game. And funnily enough, even though PSG have ended up there in a really roundabout way, which in some ways is obviously very detrimental to football and the competitive balance of football, this season has been a reminder that nothing sells football like football. And the people who are in charge of making decisions in football would do very, very well to remember that. Now, the fact is, sell this tournament any way you want. If the football's crap, people aren't going to be into it. So really, we need to have a sustainable calendar that makes it possible for the Champions League and maybe the Club World Cup to be sustainable. I guess the question is, David, can it ever be at a place where it's not just a shiny party with loads of knackered players?
No. I just think it's always going to be marketed like this. And you hit the nail on the head. The product on the pitch, what it stands for, who's involved, I'm talking about the fans here as well. That is how something is going to be created here that can last the test of time. So not how you have a fancy walk-on for players individually. It's going to be about the product and the quality of the football and the moments. That's how we look at football, remember football. You can ask anybody a World Cup that they've watched, the Euros that they've watched, a Premier League season they watched. They'll tell you hundreds, thousands, different moments, and that's what stays with people. Until the Club World Cup can have a platform where it can create those, then yeah, it's not going to resonate, and they're going to be trying new little tricks each year or however often it happens to be, to make it work. But it's all about the product and caring for the players enough that they can show their best at the tournament. And it's not basically a case of them being dragged out there and wishing that we were on a beach or around a pool somewhere.
And what I love about this question,
Yeah, brilliant question.
Yeah, but what I love about it is that it underlines the fact that nothing stays the same. A new generation comes and they look at something in a different way. And we've seen that develop over this Club World Cup. You go back less than a generation and you'll hear football commentators dismissing it out of hand. Now we've got to the stage where they're not dismissing it out of hand. Arguably in 20 years' time, we'll get to the stage where they'll regard it as, perhaps what FIFA wants it to be regarded as the nearest thing to a World Cup, but with your clubs kind of thing. And to that extent, I think the question does, it refers back to both of you have said, that it's all about the game in a way. Do you think the younger generation of the game will progress, or do you think this tournament will progress to the extent that the younger generation suddenly think, yeah, I love it, we love it, this is the best thing since sliced bread? That's the way I read it in any case. Anyway, it's time for both of you now to recommend a game of the week for us to be watching. Each week, our experts recommend a game for you to watch at the weekend. And just as importantly, they also suggest a food menu to go with it. Andy, do you want to kick off? What are you going for this week as your game of the week?
Well, following on, I suppose, from Barry's question, I've gone for Bayern versus Barca for a couple of reasons. Firstly, as I said, Miguel's game of last week was not just the game of last week, it was the game of any week. It was brilliant. It was so good. And if the Club World Cup is going to work, it's going to be because you have European teams and non-European teams coming together and making something amazing. It would be the most deflating thing, I think, if we have a last four and a final that's just full of European teams and it's just a quasi-Champions League. I think that would be a real shame. So, especially as Bayern in the first game were not tested at all, I want to see them given a real going over, not just on the pitch, but in terms of the atmosphere off it. And the Boca fans have brought an amazing atmosphere. The Monterrey fans brought an incredible atmosphere last night in Pasadena against Inter. Funnily enough, there were half as many people in the Rose Bowl for Monterrey Inter as there were for PSG versus Atletico, but the atmosphere was way better. And you need that. Like we said, you can manufacture it and try and manufacture it in any way you want. Unless the fans are on board and unless the fans are making it happen, it's not going to work. So I'm really looking forward to this. I want to see Bayern get a proper test. If you're asking me what I'm going to eat, well, for goodness sakes, I'm in Los Angeles. I'm going to be eating tacos every second until I leave here. There's no doubt about that. I'm not really sure if I can live without cilantro and fresh salsa anymore. So, let's bring more of it on. Also, there's not really time to have a full meal because there's so much football at the moment, So get involved with the Californian tacos.
Well, David, I've wanted to say this to you for a long time. Follow that.
Quite easily. And I think we might actually have the best atmosphere of the tournament here. River Plate versus Monterrey. Sunday at 2 a.m. early hours. Stay up for it or go to sleep and wake up for it. Either way, there's numerous ways I can sell this game, but I think the main one I want to sell it upon is we're going to see Sergio Ramos play a bit of argy-ball. He's going to play against River Plate. He was linked with Boca as well. It was nearly the move of my dreams. The idea of Ramos in Argentina for a year. Wow. So yeah, we're going to get to see that.
For the European angle, now that Ander Herrera is out, are we going to see him do Xavi Alonso in the 2014 Champions Final, sort of pitch invasion? Is that going to be the European angle to it?
We could get that. There's a few European angles in here. We've got Franco Mastaonto, obviously going to Real Madrid, and you look at that Monterrey side. You got some nice players from La Liga down the years there. You got Oli Torres, and one of my personal favourites, Sergio Canales. We've got him in there as well. We got Lucas Campos as well. I mean, the angles to this are just brilliant. It should be really, really exciting. So, and equally exciting is the food I'm going to pair with it. River Plate are playing, so we're going for some Argentinian here. We're going to have to get the barbecue out. We're going for an asado. We're going for paella. We're getting the steak on. We're getting the sausages, the chimichurris out. Let's get the Malbec out as well. If you don't drink, then get the mate out. You know, come on. This is going to be a hell of a game.
Can you imagine the tailgating? It's going to be incredible.
Yeah.
And it is in the States, mate. That's a home game for Monterrey. I thought you'd go Mexican. I thought you'd go refried beans.